Well, hello everybody. I'm really happy to see you all here and welcome to this edition of webinar hosted by Napa Valley Harvest, Winemaker's Perspective. I have with me Catherine Wu, co-owner and vice president of Napa Valley Wine Academy. She, I'm guess that everybody knows her at this point. She's been a diploma student since 2010, and she's been working closely with everyone for the WSET, teaching at multiple levels. So I have her here. I'm gonna allow her to take the lead and introduce our panelists today for this event. So I'm just gonna be in the back in case anybody needs me. So Catherine, the floor is all yours. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jesus. So excited to be here today. And of course, today we're here to discuss the 2023 growing season in Napa Valley, and we'll be tying influences such as weather events to decisions that the vintners have made to maintain vineyard, vine, and grape balance and or minimize risks, which in the end influences, the final style, quality, and price of wines. This should sound very familiar to WSET students because at the level 3, you learn to tie influences to style and quality. And in Diploma, you further analyze and evaluate the options that a vintner can take that also, relates to style, quality, and price. So these decisions often involve managing the vineyard, right? Compensating for shortfalls or excesses, of the key resources needed by the vine to, produce and to ripen grapes. Of course, these key resources being heat, sunlight, water, and nutrients. And the number of, winemaking and production decisions is endless as well. The exciting thing about today's webinar is we have two of Napa Valley's top winemakers to discuss real decisions they've made based on what they've seen, what the year has brought them. So I'm really excited to welcome Lindsay Wallingford. She is winemaker and vineyard manager at St. Helena Winery and has had previously worked with Screaming Eagle and Bryant Family Wines. Thanks for being here so much, Lindsay. And then we'll go on. Thank you. And then we have Michael Schultz. He's from a long family line of winemakers in Barossa, Australia. He is VP of winemaking and vineyards at St. Supri Estate Vineyard and Winery, where he's helmed growing and production for a couple of decades. So really excited to have Michael here today. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great. Well, I say we go ahead and dive right in, right? We want to give people what they're here to hear, which is, of course, from you guys, what's been happening in Napa Valley in 2023. So what we'll do is we will look at this through the lens of the growing cycle, through production, and I'll review some brief WSET learning points. And then our vintners are going to share, weather and other, influences and decisions they then made along the way. So really excited about that. We'll start with dormancy. Right? Just that period of time between November and March in Napa Valley. Temperature is important here, and that's something we'll be talking about in relation to 2023. The hope is to avoid extremely cold temperatures, which can cause, excessive damage or even kill the vines. But we also don't want unusually mild temperatures, that can lead to an early bud break. Lindsay, in this instance, would you tell us what Napa Valley what Napa Valley encountered at this time and any decisions you made because, of any weather or other events?
Absolutely. So, as everyone has heard, it was a cool, wet winter in the Napa Valley. To give you some statistics, here in St. Helena, we were 17 inches above average. And to put that in usable form for everyone, 1 inch of rain over 1 acre of vineyard is about 27,000 gallons. And if you do, quick math on it, it's about 3.6 gallons per vine. So given that we are 17 above average, that's an extra 61 gallons per vine, just to kind of put that into retrospect for everyone so you understand that. So with that much water, we did have really wet soils. And so one of the decisions that was made was delay mowing, delay disking, And the big reason for that is just allowing vineyard teams in there. So you can get people in there to start pruning. You can get tractors in there if you need to. So that's, something really important to consider on a year like this. I think the biggest thing with dormancy is, come January when the teams return, we start pruning. And given that continuous rainfall, what's especially important is maintaining your pruning wounds. And I believe we have a visual of that. Why it's so important is grapevine trunk disease. Grapevine trunk disease, it occurs after rainfalls when these spores become active and they can actually infect pruning wounds. So as you can see in that visual, what's important to do on a wet season like that is make sure every day that you're covering each cut, each pruning wound with a sealant. And what that does is it allows, protection from these grapevine trunk diseases. And as you can see in the photo, if you don't maintain that a couple years in, these vines, the xylem, the phloem becomes plugged up or essentially clogged or calloused, and you lose your grapevine. So in a wet winter, that's something that's especially important just for the longevity of the vineyard and ultimately the wines you're going to be making.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. So it really is all about maintaining the vineyard and for health and, of course, risks of fungal disease and other diseases, bacteria. So it's just really taking care of the vineyard for the coming growing cycle. So thanks so much, Lindsay. I say we go on over to bud break, right? So bud break generally happens between March and April. Of course, that's going to provide the vine shoots, leaves, tendril, inflorescences, and more. Students learn that warmth, one of the key resources, stimulates bud break. So generally, when the air temperatures are about 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to stimulate that bud burst. Soil temperatures can affect this as well. But bud burst is often more effective, more successful, and uniform if there's a significant rise in temperature at this time. Of course, we prefer bud break uniformity because it will then have leads to uniformity in other stages. So, but let's find out. Let's talk to Michael. Michael, what was happening at the time of bud break in Napa Valley, and just the situation there?
Well, as Lindsay alluded to, Catherine, we had a very wet winter, and that stayed fairly moist for quite a long time into the season, or not into the season, into the early part of the year. And along with that came cold temperatures. So cold temperatures, are, as you suggested, are going to slow things down. And that includes the vine waking up from this dormant period of the winter and getting going with a new season. So, and that's what happened. It basically delayed the bud break or made it later. So it was a couple of weeks later, and maybe some places even 3 weeks later. So quite a bit later, and what have you, which is fine, depending on how the rest of the season goes. But it once bud break get going, the other thing that these cool temperatures do is keep the shoot growth slow. So shoot growth progressed evenly and fine, but it was slower than a normal season. And again, not necessarily a problem if it can catch up with a little heat later on, which it did, of course. Another sort of side note to that is that when you have very dry starts to seasons, you often have early bud break. You also have colder conditions and therefore a greater frost risk. Alternatively, like a season of 2023, you've got wet conditions, wet grounds, and you have a much more mild frost season. So a lot less frost. In fact, we had very little danger this year in the frost season, which we had to take very little action for. The cold grounds tend to keep conditions warmer, and also because you had a delayed bud break, the buds were susceptible for a much shorter period of time. So that was a side benefit that happened to occur during the season.
No, that's great. So we had an advantage, right? Because we minimized the frost risk. And at that time, you're thinking, okay, well, now the other stages are delayed, but it really was, as you and I discussed on a previous day, it just depends what else will happen. And of course, you alluded to some catch up in other stages. So that's great. Good. Well, let's go ahead. And of course, one thing of note for students is that if we were in a different climate, if we didn't have a nice extended autumn, dry autumn, it could be that we would, a later bud break could be an issue for bringing in ripe fruit, before, rains or other issues would come in autumn. So, luckily with our Mediterranean climate, it's less of an issue for us. Well, great. Let's go on to early shoot and leaf growth. So that's the next stage. And I've got a nice from Lindsay. I've got a nice shot here of the early shoot and leaf growth, which generally happens between March and July, when the shoots continue to grow and leaves and inflorescences mature. At this stage, the vine needs warmth, sunlight, nutrients, and water. It needs it all. As the new shoots grow and the leaves develop, temperature is needed for photosynthesis to create sugars for the energy, which is going to take over from the carbohydrates that were stored and used over the winter. Vigor of the vine is influenced by temperature, water, and nutrients at this stage as well. And of course, potential diseases and even your grape variety, is going to influence vigor of the vine. But generally, a lot of grape growing choices at this time are made with consideration to the vigor, of the vine. So managing that so that you get your desired yield and quality. But anyway, all of this is taught in Diploma D1 if you haven't taken that yet with the WSET. But let's go on to Michael again. What was happening in Napa Valley at this time and any actions that you took?
Well, coming out of a wet winter and in towards the middle of the year, you see a lot of ground growth. So we need to manage our weed growth and what have you, and the competition with the plants and so forth. So, one of the issues we did have was getting out there and able to reduce that because the ground was so wet, we couldn't get out there. We did, however, have the good fortune that we do run sheep through our vineyards in the winter, so that managed to give us a head start. Even though grounds were wet, we didn't have to rely on tractors initially, so we managed to keep that situation under a little bit more control. But as soon as the sun came out, it encouraged more growth later on, because we'd certainly get those sheep out before we had shoot growth, of course. When you have a delayed bud break, it suggests that you're going to have a later season. But the bud break for me is not really the decider; it's really the flowering. So our conditions actually stayed remarkably cool this season, all the way through almost all of June. And so in May we're expecting to have our flowering. So considering that, we had cool conditions. Now, when you have cooler conditions, it reduces the enzyme activity within the plant, and therefore we're going to have a potential for not quite as strong a set. So we have to be concerned about that. And what do we do? We can't really control that, but what we can do is control the health of the vineyard. So just prior to that bloom period, that flowering period, we'll actually go through and take PDL samples, analyze the nutrient status of the plant, and think about whether that plant is in a healthy place to start proceeding with the flowering, with the set, and what have you. And if we're deficient on something, we can take action and do that, which we do. And we do that every year. So there some of those aspects of what we're doing as we go forward. Mm-hmm.
Great. So you're looking. So you're looking at your nutrient program. Are you doing any composting or other actions at this time?
We do. We're actually not composting at that moment. We typically do our compost. Typically is applied after the end of a season, and the purpose of that is that the rains that the winter carry will draw that compost benefit into the soil, and so when you start your new season, that compost is already there in preparation to enhance that plant, enhance the nutrient availability to the plant. So that's been done way in advance, so like back in November, December of last year for the current season. But we use compost. We also use, if necessary, we can apply some nutrients more in response to our PDL sample information. We can apply through drip irrigation and fungicide foliar applications as well.
No, thank you for that. And so really at this stage, there's a lot to do with either, promoting or reducing the availability of nutrients, right, for the vine's roots. That's great.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So
Indeed,
good.
yeah. So we just want to make sure the vine is as well equipped as it can be for the conditions.
Thank you for that, Michael. Let's go on to flowering and fruit set. So we've got it flowering and fruit set. Generally, this takes place between May and June. And flowering typically takes place 8 weeks from bud burst, temperature dependent, of course. Warm temperatures will promote a successful and uniform flowering. So it's generally, optimum above 17 degrees Celsius, which is 63 degrees Fahrenheit. With such temperatures, an individual inflorescence can start and finish flowering within a few days. Low temperatures can lengthen that time between, the duration of flowering, from weeks passing from the start to the end. And this can sometimes have a negative effect on the evenness, of ripening. And when it comes to pollination, warm temperatures promote the pollen germination as well. WSET students learn the optimum range is between 26 and 32 degrees Celsius, 79 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The pollen tube can be negatively affected by cold, which can result in an irregular fruit set. And this can cause poor yields. When we talk about just more piece of learning, when we talk about irregular fruit set, there's 2 common forms, couleur, which is failed fruit set, and millerandage, which is seedless grapes. And both can reduce yield. So it's just a risk. And with millerandage, which I do have a picture of here, right here. So we have these, what some people call chickens and hens. Some of the seedless grapes will stay small and green and unripe, which can negatively affect quality later on. So just a few points that WSET students learn along the way. Why don't we go? I think Lindsay and Michael both had comments here, for flowering and fruit set. Lindsay, why don't you start us off? What was happening? How did we fare during flowering and fruit set in Napa Valley? And what actions, if any, could you take at that time? Did you take?
Absolutely. So, going off what Michael said, which is exactly that, is it's really important during bloom to look at specifically your micronutrients. And we have the ability to measure that by pulling petiole samples. And we can encourage flowering and fruit set by doing zinc, boron, magnesium, and that can really help us, have the best yields possible, which ultimately, affects our quantity and quality of wine. This year, it was really good. Each variety, each shoot pushed about 3 to 4 clusters. So we did see good potential. I know here on our property, during the day, we were 75 to 94 degrees, which is that perfect range for flowering. At night, the lows were around 50. So if you look at the average, it was about 62. But again, because of the warm days and the cool nights, we actually had really nice flowering and fruit set.
So great to hear. So temperatures generally influence it, but we didn't see, just because of that sort of cooler temperatures that we had, you didn't really see,
not in the Napa Valley. However, we do have a Chardonnay vineyard over in Sonoma. And as you mentioned, the chicks and hens, that's exactly what we saw in our Chardonnay over in Sonoma. Mm-hmm. And I know Pinot Noir in Sonoma is tracking about 30 days behind last year. So Napa was great. Sonoma did experience some different things.
Yeah. And this picture here is of Chardonnay as well. So just particularly susceptible. So thank you, Lindsay. Let's go on to Michael.
So as we went through flowering, as I say, it was cool. We were slightly concerned about how cool it was. We thought it was quite an interesting season all the way along, being as maybe the coolest we recall all the way through June. But while we were a little worried about how the fruit set would come along, and actually the plants did set quite well. We saw a tiny bit of shatter, which meant a slightly looser cluster. And when it comes to our reds and what have you, we actually quite like what we see there, because it wasn't shocking. It was just a little, and that loose cluster will mean we'll have nice colouring with berries as we go through the season, we anticipate, and enhancement in sort of therefore color, anthocyanin accumulation, and the general development of the Great. So we're looking forward to that. We think we've got it set up for a pretty good situation. When you have a little bit of shout, it often means slightly lower yields, but in actual fact, our cluster counts look quite strong with what we're doing there. So yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. So let's talk the next stage. Really, this is, early grape growth is the first stage of grape development. This generally happens between June and October, so a good long period. And of course, the hard green grapes grow in size. Tartaric and malic acids accumulate. Some aroma compounds and precursors develop at this time, such as pyrazines, which can create herbaceous aromas and flavors, especially in, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, key grapes in the Napa Valley. So that was, I think, sometimes an early concern that didn't quite, it wasn't quite the risk that people thought, and tannins also accumulate at this time, but they're very bitter. So the vine needs sunlight, warmth, and mild water stress, because too much water and nutrients can encourage shoot growth over ripening. So if the ripening stage is developed, this can directly affect quality. We also want to be careful about excessive shading, but let's go to the experts. Lindsay, you want to continue here with what influences existed at this stage, in the vineyard? Did the cool temperatures continue? Did we have, any wet, any rain?
Absolutely. So as we've all spoken about, it was a cooler summer. We did have these very wet soils. So what that did was once the grapevine started growing, things just took off and we had incredibly large canopies, which is great. More leaves for photosynthesis. The problem that creates though is farming those canopies. So, a lot of hedging, a lot of leaf pulling, a lot of laterals. And what we saw with the cool weather and big canopies was increased powdery mildew risk. So it was a big year for powdery mildew. I know, for example, there's some vineyards down in Carnaus that lost 50% of the vineyard just to powdery mildew. Powdery mildew isn't a pressure once we have veraison, once the canes harden, but until then, it is a big thing to consider because it does affect whether you have fruit or not. Another thing that happened with what started showing this time of year is magnesium deficiency. So I believe we have a picture where half of the cluster is shriveled, and that is quintessential magnesium deficiency. So magnesium is an incredibly water-soluble nutrient, and because we had that really wet winter, a lot of the magnesium leached from the soils. We do have high potassium soils here at our property in St. Helena. So what occurs is the vine actually favors the uptake of potassium over magnesium, and it creates this deficiency. So this is known as bunch stem necrosis. So not only does this affect our yields, but if the vine is uptaking potassium over magnesium, high potassium in winemaking causes an increased pH in the wines. So high pH wines decreases the color stability, increases the possible microbial contamination issues. It's actually a big problem. So in this situation, at this point in the season, it's really important to address something like this, such as magnesium deficiency. In the winery, we could add tartaric acid and balance out those wines, but it's not something you want to do if you can avoid it. So it is best to address this in the vineyard. And it's not just something we face here in Napa. If you think about Europe, these limestone-rich soils, they have the exact same problem, but it's calcium, not potassium, that's favored. And so they have the same issue with magnesium, where calcium outcompetes or is most likely uptaken. And so magnesium is a big focus in the vineyards and is a big thing to think about for winemaking.
And that's such a good thing for students to hear, right? They're seeing this, and this is something that you're taking action on in the vineyard, but it is also related to winemaking, right? And quality in the wine, especially if you're, think about instability of color. So great connection there with something that's happening in the vineyard also, influencing winemaking and the final quality of wine. Great. Let's go on to, Michael, I don't know if you, want to add anything here.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Lynn's got some really interesting points there about the magnesium. I mean, you think about Napa Valley and the diversity of Napa Valley, we have sort of half the world's soil orders here. On one of our vineyards, we actually have an abundance of magnesium in much of our soil, so we don't have that same issue that Lindsay's experienced this year, which is I think super interesting actually. But we have to be aware of what magnesium we have. But as discussed earlier, we do PDL samples, and part of it is we're looking at that information with the knowledge of that's one of our the attributes of that site. It's quite interesting. But listen, as we went, we came through, in the cooler parts of May into June, the shoot growth was a little slow, and then once we got a little sunshine, we had quite a warm July. That's really sort of sped off and really grew incredibly well. So we had to pay a lot of attention to canopy, as Lindsay did, and look for vine. We looked for vine balance in the early days, and we actually, because we knew that the flowering was going to be late, and that being a real indicator that the harvest would be late, we wanted to encourage shoot growth, and therefore we went in and did our suckering or our shoot removal of the unwanted shoots as early as possible, and we did it quite swiftly. And by doing that, the goal there was to allow the energy of each plant to put it all into the good shoots, the shoots we left with the plant at pruning time, which the count buds, so that all the energy is going to the count buds we always plan to have there and plan to produce the fruit. And therefore, it also encouraged those shoots to grow a little faster and a little stronger, so that we would have a healthy canopy getting into the season. This, of course, is coupled to that point that we're trying to have a vision to ensure we have a good display of fruit down the track. So we want even fruit through the fruit zone, some spacing between clusters and what have you. And so while we have to do more work later on to fine tune that, it's the precursor to achieving that we do at that time of the year. So we do a lot of that at that time. So yeah, that's what we're doing with canopy management at that period.
Yeah, and of course, canopy management is one of the big sort of words, it encompasses so much, and WSET students have to learn all about the different options and things that a vintner can do to maintain that healthy, vineyard and vine balance.
Yeah.
And you brought up, I love this discussion because each of you had, it shows to the diversity of Napa Valley, right? One person might have a deficiency in another has maybe excess, and that all goes to just the complexity of our, of our terroir, of the different soils, of the different, all the other things that can influence, in the Napa Valley. It's just such a complex growing area. So that was good fun. So let's go on with our, for our sort of growth. The next stage let's discuss is veraison, right? Sugar accumulation and coloring are taking place. This is the second stage of grape development. Sunlight, warmth, along with mild water stress are generally things that the WSET teaches, are needed at this stage. This is also a good time, I think, when you, Lindsay and Michael, you're seeing what fruit is lagging behind on the vine. So, because even ripening can just, speak to, quality in the final wine. So maybe, Michael, you want to start us off here, just about, veraison and what was happening in Napa Valley. I'll just pull up a sort of a progression of veraison picture here.
Well, there's a couple of things here. Well, we talked about bud break earlier, and while that was a little late, the things we really look at is flowering and set and how that comes together. If flowering is late, we pretty much can assume the rest of the season will be quite late. That's the real indicator to us. Equally, if flowering is fast, it often means we have a very short ripening window. We can make very even and good harvest decisions down the track. But if our flowering window is a little longer, that means we have on the same plant some clusters that are less ripe than others, and we have to pay attention to that. So at this point, we're thinking about that at veraison, and we're watching the veraison because it will follow very much how the flowering when it came along. So if we have a slow flowering, which we did have a slightly delayed flowering, slow flowering across the plants. So we look at veraison, we watch it. It also continued a little slowly, and we actually therefore go in with a mind to balance the vine some more, but also take out the most lagging clusters so that all the clusters that are left in the plant are in a very tighter window of maturity. And by doing that, as they develop forward, they'll develop together more evenly. And then when we finally get to the point of needing to make a harvest decision, our harvest decision typically is tighter, better, and a little easier to make. So we're doing a lot of work on that at this point. We're considering our fruit load. You know, I talked before that we have quite a lot of loose clusters this year, so we have to take into account that. We actually quite like that. And just again, looking to making sure we have good display at that point, but helping the vine to carry its load. A vine with a big load will take longer to ripen it. A vine with a light load would take less time. So at this point, we're thinking about, well, veraison is happening at such and such a date. It's quite late. We need to ensure that we get to a point of harvest, and we would like to speed that up. So we want to ensure that the vine has a load that it can sustain. So at this point, we are giving all of that due consideration.
Goes to balance. And the worry with, is the worry with there being some, the progression of the ripeness being uneven. You'll have some unripe fruit, and that will then change the style, of your final wine if you leave that all hanging, right? As well as maybe quality level, because we'll be discussing, ripeness in relation to quality level. Is that sort of the main worry about leaving on that, the underripe fruit?
Yeah, it certainly will change the outcome of your wine somewhat. But I mean, one of the outcomes could be that at the point of making a harvest decision, I might walk a vineyard. I know I have the chemistry in hand. I know what's going on with the vines, but the final decision is going to be on flavor and presence and what we see. And I might be hesitant to start that harvest if I can still taste green berries, or berries that are underripe berries, I'm sorry. And so I might have a plant that's loaded up with 85% or 90% of fabulous clusters, but those last few percent, it might have me hesitate. So if I unload those early on, my decision at harvest time is more sure, more secure, and to be quite frank, more comfortable. Allows us to be consistent in what we're doing. Yeah.
Hey, the human element is important here as well.
Yeah.
Lindsay, do you want to add, anything veraison, anything you did at this time?
Yeah, so exactly what Michael was saying, all the same things, for at this point in the season, one of our biggest focus is declumping. So, for example, if you look at that third photo, how all those clusters are touching, given this year, given the powdery mildew pressure, one of the first things we did was, for example, in that third picture, we would remove that cluster right in the middle, because you don't want your clusters touching. You don't want them growing together. That's when you have increased risk of powdery mildew, later in the season, increased risk of botrytis. So that is a quality control thing that we do right then. Another easy thing that we do every year that's very standard is, our trellis is vertical shoot positioning. So we do what's called 0, 1, 2 in terms of removing clusters. Anything that is below the first wire, we do not allow any clusters. That second wire, it can have 1 cluster. That third wire, it can write 2 clusters. The rough average is that it takes 14 leaves to ripen a cluster. And so that is why we do that, because we know that those short shoots, that's never going to make the quality wine that you want. And, just like Michael was saying, if you left that, you're actually taking away from your productive cluster. So in essence, you are decreasing your potential quality of wine from the rest of that vine, because it's putting so much effort into the short shoot that's never going to ripen. And then at that point too, again, what we mentioned before was just staying on top of magnesium and fertilizers for this season. It's important to give the grapevines everything that they need at this point to help you produce the best wines possible.
No, thank you. And such detail there. I don't know about, other folks watching, but there was a lot of detail in there that I was like, geeking out over. So thank you to you both. Let's continue on our ripening journey, if you will, right, from August to October. And ripening is the third, stage of grape development, as the WSET instructs it. It follows the early grape growth and veraison. And this, the WSET instructs, is arguably the most important vine process in determining grape quality. So shoot growth should have slowed, sugar and water accumulates in the grapes, acids fall, tannins, color, and a number of aroma compounds and precursors develop. So the temperature, sunlight, and water, maybe less of it at this stage in particular, are influencers of this stage, the ripening stage. So temperatures, of course, affect sugar accumulation, malic acid degradation, so the wines aren't too acidic. You know, a lot of people thought, hey, maybe the wines are going to be pretty high in acid this year because of the cooler temperatures, and maybe we can speak to that. But, you know, here also is when you break down pyrazines, color development is and tannin ripening is affected. So lots, much more going on at this time. Lindsay, why don't you start us off? I think both of you will have you, speak to sort of the ripening stage. What was happening? Did any of that previous, the cool temperatures that we're talking about for 2023, did that continue, or were you seeing great ripening at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we're looking at this year as a growing season, we're averaging about 21 days behind last year on our property. And that sounds very, very drastic, but if I compare it to 2018, we're only about 10 days behind. So, I think here in Napa, we got accustomed to a couple hot drought years in a row, but we're really, not too far off. I looked at growing degree days yesterday just for fun, and we are on track with 2010 almost to a T. However, we're ahead of 2005. So, we never know where the rest of the season is going to go. But during ripening, the biggest thing to focus on is just controlling water. We want to make sure that the vines have enough to continue to ripen and mature. However, we don't want to stress them to the point that they crash and we lose all of our fruit that was available for the season. So on our property, we do have soil moisture meters that we check once a week, and we have them at various points in the property, and they go down about 7 feet. So it's really nice to kind of look at a number for, how our soils are looking in terms of water available. And, something we consider is the rule of thumb, we never go below 50% because that's when the vines will crash. And science and data is good, but visually you can also see water stress in the vineyard. And it's really important to notice that too. So some things that we look at is, we don't want the vines to continue growing a green tip, because then we know they have too much water because they're focusing on green growth and not fruit maturation. So we're looking at shoot tips. You want to see those tendrils start dying off. That's a sign that there is just enough water stress. The leaves will start to yellow around the basal region, so right around the fruit. That's a good sign too. We want that as we get closer to ripening. Something you don't want to see, which when you need to put just a little bit of water on, is when the leaves start to turn away from the sun, because that is when the vine is going almost borderline survival mode. It's not focusing on the fruit, it's just focusing on, keeping the vine alive. But to be more specific about this year, at this point in time, something that we considered was, it is a cooler season. There is a potential for fall rains. There is a potential for the weather to go totally different direction. There always is the risk of fires now in California. So it is something to consider. So we made the decision, even though the vine pushed 3 to 4 clusters a shoot, we dropped everything down to 2 clusters a shoot maximum. And we did that to ensure that what we have, we are able to get ripe. So in this instance, we chose, again, focusing on quality, getting the fruit mature so we can make the best wine and not just wait and hedge our bets with a higher yielding vineyard.
Yeah. So direct actions that are going to affect the quality of the wine and the, style of the wine.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I think, Michael, you had mentioned earlier when we were speaking that you also use, evapotranspiration sensors. Maybe you want to jump in here about anything, you did or we're looking at, particularly at this time of this stage.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, what our what we do in the vineyards is about being proactive, about looking at the information we have now and what can we anticipate will happen tomorrow. We don't actually know, and there's always going to be change in the future, right? But we have to look at the information we have and move forward with actions to try to enhance what the vineyard will do next. And we also have the soil sensors that Lindsay was talking about, which are great because it gives you a depth in the ground and it shows you how quickly the top of your grounds dry out. That's a good indicator. More recently, we've started using some technology, which is really quite interesting, and it's a measure of evapotranspiration, which is how much moisture the plant is giving up. So the plant's through its leaves, its stomata, the plant will give out water into the atmosphere. Part of it's just this growing mechanism, part of it's a cooling mechanism, part of it's, as Lindsay mentioned, the leaf turning away from the sun. It's all part of this sort of situation. So what the evapotranspiration is telling us is how much water a plant's giving up every week. So we can therefore think back upon seeing that information and say, well, if it's giving up 8 gallons or we should talk in litres, I guess, but 30 litres of water, do we need to apply 30 litres, or is it 8 litres, or is it 6, or what is it? So we think about that, and the reason we're thinking about this in any year is to keep the canopy healthy, because a healthy canopy, we believe, is really in its best position to ripen the fruit as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So we're trying to maintain that. In a season like this, we're particularly diligent to it because we know we will have a late season. We're going to have a late harvest. And so we want to keep that canopy as healthy as possible for as long as possible. I want to keep those leaves as green as possible for as long as possible. This technology, the soil moisture probes, and more recently these evapotranspiration sensors, they're really interesting information to help us put the right amount of water on the plant. Too much water on a vine is not really what we want as winemakers, because we believe that actually if you put too much on, it's going to dilute our opportunity in the tank, in the wine. But too little water will create a stressed vine, and a stressed vine's okay if it's measured, but if it's a measured stress, it can quickly become too much stress. And if you have too much stress, well, the plant will not operate effectively to mature the fruit as best we want. And that is to encourage anthocyanin development and tannin development and what have you. So we're using these bits of technology now as informants. They're informing us of a little more about the plant, and it's a little newer for us. It's been the last few years we've been trying this, but it's super interesting technology actually. So it's cool. Yeah, really good.
I mean, I hope everybody's seeing here, like this is, the number of, decisions or things or options that vintners can take. It's just mind blowing. I remember once taking a group of students to Corson, and Kathy Corson, I happened to mention, oh, there's hundreds of decisions that a winemaker needs to make. And she's like, 100,000. And I think we're seeing just a little bit of that here. And of course, this stage is so important. Ripening is, related closely to style, right? Here we want to maintain Napa Valley signature style, right? We want the ripeness of those grapes. We're going to get, the signature Napa Valley, aromas and flavors, all of these things we're looking for, quality. When WSET teaches about quality, it ties quality to, a balance in the structural components of the wine, to intensity of aromas and flavors, of course, length and other elements. But we're seeing all of these decisions are leading towards that, which I just think is fascinating for all of us viewers, to be hearing about these minute steps that you're taking for that end goal. I think we're just 45 minutes in, so we'll just sort of wrap this up in the next 5 minutes so that we can take some questions. So maybe we just last time we spoke, let's just finish up with what's going on right now, right? We've started some harvesting. Last time we spoke, Michael, you were harvesting Chardonnay. And maybe you want to tell us, and with any reds, if you want, sort of what you're seeing, with the grapes that you're bringing in, anything related to the weather events of 2023, where you're seeing, a difference maybe in the style of your Chardonnay, or any reds. And then I'll ask the same question of Lindsay. So you want to start us off, Michael?
Yeah. Well, actually, we've been bringing Sauvignon Blanc. We don't actually, at Saint Supery, we're a state brand, and we actually don't grow any Chardonnay. There was a time we did, but not anymore. But Sauvignon Blanc in this day and age for us, and Sauvignon's, a relatively early ripener, and so we kicked into that, and probably about 2 weeks later than we would normally kick into it. And we're actually almost finished our Sauvignon Blanc harvest, so it's been going for several weeks. And again, our finishing date here looks to be about 2 weeks behind what we would have done a year ago. So that's roughly what's been happening with the season. Sauvignon Blanc look really good, to be quite frank. I actually have been really excited about this season. I think that the cool start to the season all the way through the end of June, being really the coolest we remember, of quite a warm July, so we had a lot of heat units in July. But in this day and age, I mean, listen, one of the things we want sunshine, we want heat. Of course, in Napa, we get some hot days, that's okay. We have tools to manage that. So we actually have misters and the sprinklers and all sorts of things we can use these days to cool things down on hot days. The Sauvignon Blanc, if it's an indicator of what's to come with our reds, we're looking towards a very strong season. The Sauvignon Blancs are showing really good flavor. One thing we have seen is acids drop a little faster than normal. So we've had to react to that to try to capture some of these picks a touch earlier than when we first started the pick. But that's part of what we do every year in winemaking. Every season throws a little challenge or a little wrinkle that we have to stop and think and consider and adjust. And with our Sauvignon, we've done that, and maybe the reds will show us that too. But at the moment, I think we have a very promising season ahead of us.
Okay, great. Lindsay, same question for you, please. Oh, you need to turn on. I think you're still muted.
So we're not even close to harvest. I anticipate us starting our reds around October 15th. And, our Chardonnay, which is traditionally harvested the first week of September, we're seeing all those chicks and hens. And so that's, probably even farther behind, over a month out. But this year I am excited. Everything looks really good. We have really nicely sized berries, nice loose clusters. Quality looks great. And, given this cooler year, one of the neat things is, I've seen a lot of people, no one's using their shade cloth this year, which is really nice because, again, everything's developing really nice. So we had good canopies, we have good shading of fruits. So, something that Michael mentioned earlier is it's a high anthocyanin year. So everything's looking really good. So something that we'll have to be aware of in the winery is just making sure that we don't over extract and get these big, ginormous tannic wines. It'll be something that we'll address in tank to balance each winery specific style and the style of wine that they're going for.
Right. No, thank you for that. So very different, because there were a lot of people at the beginning of the year just saying, oh my goodness, this is going to be a high acid year. It's going to be, I think it's just developed into something, different where, hey, we're still going to get some, intensity of flavor, nice color, so that we'll have to take action maybe in the cellar, right, for, thoughtful cap management or, maybe actions that you'll take. I mean, do you anticipate any sort of, steps, in the winery that you might have to take due to, what you're seeing in the grapes?
Yeah, so every year for us is different. In my position, we taste every tank every day, and that's how we decide how we're going to treat the tank that day, is depending on how extraction is coming, how tannins are looking. This year I am excited, as opposed to last year. We had our weather events of last year. So last year we had to be very careful in the winemaking and really safe. This year, because fruit is intact, acids look good, we can go back to that normal style of winemaking, excuse me, where we hopefully at this point we'll be able to do our long cold soaks, our long skin contact, our long macerations, if the wines are evolving in the direction we want them to.
Right. No, thank you. And Michael, same, for you, are you expecting, just on what the fruit is looking like now, are you expecting, sort of, any actions you might need to take in the cellar or be careful of?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're measuring anthocyanins in the grapes right now, and so at the moment we think things will, the season suggests is promising. Our results are now suggesting it's promising. We have a way to go before we really know, but at the moment, like Lindsay said, I think the season is kind of exciting at the moment, and I'm encouraged by it. So when I'm going to mirror Lindsay's comments. When we get into tank, we're going to have to assess how extraction is coming along, how easily and quickly it's extracting, because if these wine juices do extract quickly and easily, we need to be a little careful about the over extraction aspect of it. But that's okay. That's why we're here, and we've been doing this for years to try to be on top of this. So we'll think about that, and we've experienced it before, and we can handle it again. But if we make wines that have really big texture and big volume and color and approach, you can keep them somewhat gentle, we'll be in a good place. So I'm as I've said before, I'm encouraged by the season at the moment. I am.
Well, I think I could speak for all of us Napa Valley wine drinkers. We're glad you're here too. I mean, all these decisions and all these actions you take along the way is what leads, to the quality wine that, Napa Valley is known for. Why don't we wrap up? I think it's just in a final statement, just maybe a one-sentence statement on what you think, the quality of the 2023 vintage will be. Lindsay.
Yeah, again, I'm really looking forward to this year. Last year was a tough one, because we did have a lot of berries and raisins and high VAs coming in the door and really had to make different decisions. But this year I'm excited. This is reminding me more of 2018 in the sense that I think we will have a long picking window, and we'll be able to, as long as the rain keeps at bay and everything looks good, will really allow everything to, get exactly where we want it before we pick it in terms of each block and each varietal. And I'm really excited about it.
You're making me excited about it. Michael, just a final quality statement, 2023.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we've got a little way to go yet. And who knows what tomorrow brings, but Napa is a pretty resilient place. We have generally a fairly consistent situation. So I think we're looking towards a really positive outcome. What we're seeing in the plants right now is really strong. The display and all the work we've done, I think, is put us in a pretty good situation. So everything's in place to come together. Everything's in place to bring fruit into the winery that will be really, really fun to work with. And for us as winemakers, I mean, that's one of the cool things. If you ever walk through our cellar when we've got red ferments going and taste these and watch the progression, is a cool moment. It's really cool time of the year to see it. And so it's a very much part of what I look forward to as we go along, the culmination of a whole season and what we get. And at the moment, we're really going towards a good outcome. So let's keep it going.
I love to hear it. Absolutely. So I think we can take a few, we're just towards the top of the hour. Maybe we can take a few questions here. Let me go ahead and get to our question bank. Apologies. Let me escape out of my presentation. Okay, let's see. So we have some questions here. Let me just get to this bank. Questions about, what sort of materials are you using? What about, they want to know about sort of summer pruning. What sort of actions are you taking, with summer pruning, and what are you doing?
So, I mean, from a canopy point of view, again, like I said earlier, we're really trying to make sure we have our vine balance in place. When we get shoot growth to the point we want it, we do trimming of the tops of our shoots to try to keep them all even, try to keep a similar sort of leaf number on each shoot, so we have an even ripening for the number of clusters that goes down there. So that's the extent of it. We, in some situations, we'll go through and do lateral removal. We don't do it all that often, unless a season sort of really requires it. We haven't seen a need for that in many blocks, a few, but not all blocks. So we do a little bit of that. Sometimes we'll, so we're just trying to maintain that canopy in a nice even state to match the fruit that's in the display.
Oh, thank you for that, Michael. We have a question, wanting to know, hey, for when you go to seal, when you're pruning and you want to go ahead and seal those wounds, what are you using?
Yeah, so we use a product called VidiSeal. That's the biggest one on the market. And I actually just pulled up the MSDS on it just for fun. So it's a copolymer emulsion, calcium carbonate, water, cinnamon oil, soap bark, and titanium dioxide. So, everything that we use in the vineyard is food grade, but it's meant to be, where's my notes on that? It's meant to be, a pruning wound sealant that contains natural plant oils.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Another question, and I think, you were talking about the hens and, chickens and the hens. Can you destem and sort to get the hens separated from the chicks?
No, not in Chardonnay. It is something that would be possible, but chicks and hens actually has the potential to make really great wine because, you do get the big berries that are high in sugar, have those nice ripe components, but then you still have the small acidic berries. So chicks and hens isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of producers where that is the ideal cluster for them. Then again, that's more for white wine. So specifically Chardonnay, for a lot of winemakers, it's, the perfect situation.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Let's see, maybe two more questions, because there's a lot of questions that have come in. But we do have a question on, could the panelists comment on the practice of water stressing vines to produce grapes of higher quality? Is that still a valid practice? Since you're right here, Lindsay, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. It is 100% a practice. Yes. And so that's why we are, using all the technology that Michael mentioned that we have available, such as measuring evapotranspiration, looking at soil moisture, because we do not want to give too much water to the vines where it focuses on green canopy growth. We want the focus to go to fruit maturation, which does involve water stressing the vines, so we don't dilute, the berries and the juice that we have available for winemaking.
Yeah, no, thank you. Michael, I don't know if you want to comment as well.
Yeah, listen, yes, stress is certainly a real thing we consider. And we actually like the vines to be stressed a little, but it depends on the time of the season. It depends on how far you are from harvest, and depends on the season itself. But when I say we like stress, we like a little stress. We don't like a lot of stress. And so the situation of this year, because we know we've got quite a late maturity period, and we have a long way to go to get to that period, we actually don't want all that much stress right now. A little is fine, but not very much. As we get further and closer towards our harvest date, we might be happy to encourage a little more stress at that point. But yeah, no, stress is a real thing. We do like it within reason.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay, one more question, and I see that there's multiple questions. Everybody seems to be interested in, how do you adjust the magnesium versus potassium? Just wanting to know how does that work? You want to start us off on that, Lindsay?
Yeah, so in essence, we're just applying Epsom salts. That is exactly what we're applying. So, some ways we've done it in the past is you can just get little cups of Epsom salt. You can put it under the drip emitters. We can also, send that in through the drip system. So where we mix it in a tank mix and then just throw the Epsom salt in through the drip line. Another thing we've been doing this year is actually spraying. So like you would, for controlling pest or controlling, mildew, this and that, we literally just go through the vineyard and just spray magnesium and water. So it gets directly onto the leaves and onto the fruit.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. And I think, Michael, you had a little bit of excess. So I don't know if you want to add, final comment.
Well, when I say excess, it's basically it's in the soil already. We have a higher magnesium content in some of our soils, not all of them, but some of them. And so the action we normally take there is to apply a calcium-based product. So calcium, if you apply calcium, it offsets basically competes with the magnesium to press it aside and allows a little uptake of the vine. And when you allow that to happen, allows the vine to draw up other nutrients. So as Lindsay says, not enough magnesium is not a great thing. Too much magnesium actually causes competition and blocks the vine from pulling the nutrients up through the root system that it wants. So the concept is actually quite interesting. But what we do is we give more calcium to the plant, and it helps offset that competition.
Yeah, no, thank you. I cannot believe there's so many great questions coming in, and I'm sorry that we can't cover all of them today. I know that there'll be plenty more webinars. I want to thank the Napa Valley Vintners for creating this webinar, and thank the WSET for getting us all together. And I can't thank Lindsay and Michael enough, because as I suspected, I learned a lot today, and I've taught diploma, classes. So I always learned something new. I want to thank you so much for that. Jesus, back to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks everybody for watching today. I hope you all enjoyed this wonderful session. I mean, it was really interesting and informative. Please do complete your feedbacks that is popping up on your screens. This session, it is recorded and will be available in our hubs on WSET Event Hub and on the YouTube channel. We also want to thank Napa Wine Valley Academy and Napa Valley Vintners for organizing this event. Thank you for everything you have done. And to find more about qualifications, always check our where to study pages, and then look on for theirs. We have wonderful AVPs all around the globe. So thank you for being with us here today, and I hope you all enjoy about it.
Thank you, Jesus. Have a great day, everybody, or
You as
great
well.
evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much.